Nobody needs this information more than emergency responders, police, firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, other EMS roles, dispatchers, corrections officers, active military and veterans, and I'm also going to include social workers and other mental health professionals, clergy, ER professionals, and others in the mix. Although these would not technically fall under the heading of, quote, first responder, their experiences of stress, trauma, and secondary trauma mirror those of first responders. This is a quote from early in the book called Mindfulness for Warriors by Kim Colegrove. And today I'm going to share some of the top 5 most impactful things from this book. But first, it's time to lace up, chalk up, get logged in, and get locked on as we put people first, share our processes, and help each other make progress on the People, Process, Progress podcast with Kevin Pinnell. Thank you, everybody, for coming back to the People, Process, Progress podcast. Again, my name is Kevin Pinnell. Please go to peopleprocessprogress.com for more information about the show, my social media contacts, and contact me. Like I said, I'm going to go over today some really important things that I learned from reading the book Mindfulness for Warriors, Empowering First Responders to Reduce Stress and Build Resilience. This is by Kim Colegrove, who is the author of the book, also owner at Pause First Academy. And unfortunately, as she details in the book, the widower of a public safety law enforcement officer that put 30 years on the job, and then we lost him to suicide. And so what I want to cover and share, like I said, are 5 key things. The first thing I'm going to share, though, is the structure of this book. I got this from my local library. Certainly you can do that. Amazon, it's wherever books are sold. And it's broken up into warrior, weight, and wisdom. And in the warrior section, the first part, we hear about Kim and David. David was her husband, and some other impacts in the family. And I'll touch on one of those here in a little bit. The weight, we hear stories from a lot of first responders, and you'll see a lot of themes from the tools that I'll touch on later, where a lot of first responders, where she got stories from them, use these tools. I use them also. They're very helpful. And then wisdom is the last part of the book, and that is tools and resources, references, and things like that. So again, these are the top 5 kind of foundational things that I really found most impactful. There's way more than this in the book Mindfulness for Warriors. So again, I highly encourage you to get it, whether you're a first responder, you're the spouse of a first responder, and all the different facets that means, like in the intro I meant. And, when a lot of folks say first responder, they say police, fire, EMS, dispatch, probably police, fire, EMS, and unless you're in public safety, don't know the critical role dispatch plays, but the other positions too that Kim mentioned, folks that hear horrible things, see horrible things, are in that environment in some capacity, you are first responders, and we appreciate it. So the first thing is that I'm going to say that impacted me and I'm familiar with as well is that invisible wounds don't stay that way, right? So over one bad call, months of calls, years of calls, a service, a whole career of calls, these wounds, these mental wounds, this trauma, this horrible stuff that we see, whether we're, treating patients in a hospital or running calls on the street, or we were shot at in war, or as police officers, or something, just, terrible things happen. Those wounds are called invisible wounds, right? Because they're in your mind. But at some point, they don't stay there, right? People start to withdraw, isolate themselves, right? So we see behavioral changes. Rage builds up. We're angry, right? This stress builds up and can fester into rage. Lashing out, at the world because of maybe the injustice of a call that you went on where you couldn't help somebody, or you just see bad things and don't understand why. Certainly questioning faith, all these different impacts. Some folks are the opposite. It strengthens their faith. Alcohol and drugs are well-known coping mechanisms. They're not good ones. Depending. So the alcohol, certainly not. Illicit drugs, painkillers, things like that. Abuse of those, not. There are some, antidepressants, things like that folks can use that do help people. But when we abuse them more on the kind of prescription drug side, they're not good. And again, alcohol is a big go-to in the public safety world for, and really probably post-COVID world. I'm sure alcohol use has gone up quite a bit. But that was the first thing, not surprising to me, because it's something that's impacted me as well. It didn't stay invisible. It, caused me to have some panic and anxiety and live through things that I didn't process well before. And I certainly was no stranger to mood swings and things and drinking to cope. And have worked through a lot of that stuff. But, Kim talks about that in her book. And it's really good to kind of read through that and hear other people's stories as well. And I say good because it's good for us, I think, to know that we're not alone, right? Sometimes you can feel isolated or when you're withdrawn, when you're having a bad time and you feel like, oh, it's just me, I'm the only one. But if you're listening to this, or your spouse or someone listening to this and they're having problems and they're a first responder, you're not alone. They're not alone, right? They don't have to go through this alone together. And I'll give some resources here in a bit to help with that. The second that I listed, and again, there's a lot more impactful things, but for me is that suicide causes ripple effects. And there's this phenomenon, not just your immediate family, obviously, when you're gone, but there's a phenomenon where suicide can be contagious. It's akin, and I think I heard on Jocko podcast and other resources, and Kim mentions it in this book, but the contagiousness where people that were exposed to suicide have a higher, or rather increases one's potential to consider it, right? Because maybe you look at that person and you go, oh, well, they got out and they were dealing with the same stuff I am, but no, that's not a good thing. And one of the stories, the super sad stories, is that her husband, David, had a really close nephew, and not that long after David took his own life, his nephew took his own life. So the contagiousness of this horrible event, this horrible act, spread. And kudos to Kim for talking openly about this in her book. It's a super impactful story. Again, get the book, read it. And here's a quote from Kim that speaks about this, where suicide does not end suffering. It simply passes suffering on to others. So, those folks that are left behind, and I know folks that were close with others. I've peripherally known folks that have committed suicide. Everybody's left wondering, could they have done something? Should I have recognized this sign? Why? There's anger, there's sadness, there's all these different things in every emotion that people feel toward that person after that person's gone. And we've heard, stories in the news where particularly first responders, some of them have done it in a very high profile way, maybe near where their friends are, or coworkers. But again, I think, Kim sums it up where, it doesn't end it. It just passes it on to the folks that are left behind. That was a really, really tough thing to read through, that she talked through both her husband's story of suicide, the notification that she got, right? For those of you not familiar, that when folks show up, whether it's military folks in dress uniform or public safety folks or someone and your loved one's deployed or out on duty, there can be some bad news, right, coming when they show up and they look somber and they're going to talk to you. And she walks the reader through. She walks us through that in her book, and it's just really hard to read. But again, she's so brave for sharing that because it's, something that we should all be aware of to help others if we see some of these signs. And I'll go through some of these as well about the predictors, and that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. So I'm gonna read through the list of some of these predictors or behaviors that we can pay attention to for friends we have, peripheral folks we know, people at work, family members, to maybe keep an eye on that, to let them know we're there for them and to look out for. So this list starts on page 134 in the book, and I'm just going to kind of quote the paragraph before the list. The following list of symptoms can be signs or indicators that the possibility of suicide exists, especially if multiple symptoms are concurrent, chronic, or repetitive. So here's the list: chronic stress, depression, anxiety, anger, intense irritability, aggression, alcohol abuse or alcoholism, drug use or addiction, hopelessness, isolation and withdrawal, suicidal ideation, talk of suicide. So if you know someone that experiences those, multiple of those signs, please have them reach out. Most folks that are at that state don't want to reach out. Maybe reach out for them, talk to their coworkers, their friends. I'm not licensed in any of this, just other things I've read, and again, some suggestions Kim has. And also there's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, or Lifeline rather, that's 1-800-273-8255. Or folks can text the crisis text line, which is text the words HOME to 741-741, and we can get some folks from help. So again, if you see those signs, those behaviors, those addictions, please take note of them and don't ignore them, so that, hopefully we're not some of the ones wondering what we could have done. The fourth thing that was really impactful of the many things, but just to share on, a podcast that's not just me reading the whole book to everybody, is that really first responder spouses are first responders. And she talks about this, after her husband's death, and she's getting organized and talking about sharing mindfulness and all this, and kind of feeling apprehensive that, I'm not a first responder. Who am I to talk to folks? And fortunately, a friend of hers, someone she knows, says, you were married to one of us. So in the book, she shares how that made her feel much better. But, I've been married when I was in public safety, and certainly our spouses are the first line, right? For those of us that wear the badge, that put scrubs on and take care of patients each day, that take the 911 calls, they're the first ones that see that anger, that see those signs and symptoms, that we lash out, even if we don't mean to, we're just in a bad place, or that watch our behaviors, right? Eating bad, drinking too much, if we're taking those painkillers for that injury, too much, not just every now and then for pain. All the signs and symptoms that Kim mentions in that list, which is focused on suicide, but also behavioral changes that are common to the first responder community. Our spouses are there first, right? They notice when we come home and maybe we had a bad call, or we're exhausted, or we're sitting at, a sporting event with them, or our child's sports, and we're just kind of there, but not really there. And so that's something that we, as first responders, previous first responders, veterans, all the, the folks that we mentioned earlier, need to pay attention to and appreciate. And when we're in a bad state of mind, that's hard to do. So when you're in your ups and you're having a good day, make sure you tell your spouse you love them and you appreciate them. And, thank you, spouses out there. Thanks to my spouse. Love you much. We're going to be actually married 21 years here the 15th. So happy anniversary to us and to everybody else out there that's been together for a while. But don't forget those spouses, right? They keep us going. The last bit I want to share and is the tools part, right? So this is the wisdom, the mindfulness tools. And again, it's called Mindfulness for Warriors. So this is part of it. And one of the challenges, which is, similar, or reminded me rather of, and I talked to a good friend of mine a long time ago when he used to have the Between the Slides podcast about law enforcement's resistance to using the incident command system. Well, Kim in the book mentions, how am I going to go talk to, or someone says to her, you'll never get law enforcement folks to go do mindfulness or talk about it. And in the book, she even says, hold my beer. And of course, now, we have the Pause First Foundation and all the work that she's done. And in this wisdom section, the big buckets that fall under overall mindfulness, but the first one's meditation, the second one's mindfulness, and then the third one is breath or breathing. And so a great short, brief, to the point definition that, of course, first responders like to keep it simple, right? For meditation is a few moments of uninterrupted silence each day. Sounds glorious, right? Sometimes, as she mentions earlier in the book, and I didn't really touch on, silence isn't what we need because it helps us ruminate, and by help, meaning it's not helpful, right? So we sit there and it makes us think about things, whereas staying active. But when we start working, and when she starts working, and how I've worked with meditation and mindfulness, it becomes and gives you tools to calm your mind, to calm your breathing when you're feeling anxious and your chest gets tight and you think about bad things. And, relatable to first responders, it's much needed after hearing, station tones, right? That alarm, that Pavlov's dog's symbol, like tones are going off, got to do something. You're always ready for the tones to go off, whether you're at dinner, you're sleeping, you're working out, you're cleaning the rig at the station, or maybe you're in your cruiser, right, on patrol, and you're listening to radio crackles or codes and calls coming over, or you're a dispatcher in the 911 center, and of course call centers have all that noise, people talking, calls coming in, or you're in healthcare in the hospital and those patient alarm bells are going off. And when we get out of any of those environments, it can seem deafeningly quiet, but that's where meditation is helpful. And that's where, again, we can self-soothe and calm ourselves, whether it's guided or ourselves. And Kim has great guided things in there. I've mentioned this on other podcasts, but I use Headspace app and it's fantastic. And I try each morning, I get up and I work out, and then I do some meditation afterwards, either 5, 10, 15 minutes, depending on what I have going on that morning. And I can tell the days that I don't do it and the days that I do it. I'm calmer later in the day when I go to bed, when I do it, versus when I don't. I'm not quite able to relax quite as much. So the next big category that Kim walks us through is mindfulness. And so this, her brief, keep it simple definition is awareness in the present moment without judgment, right? So, she goes on to say a little bit after that, we avoid labeling, criticizing, categorizing, quantifying, qualifying, or complaining, right? Which, first responders do quite often. To me, I take that, as a first responder to think, we can tear ourselves out of our mental size up, right? And skip the triage of the world where we're always looking around and always what's going to happen here, what could happen there, what would I do if this situation happened, how am I going to respond? We can shut down or try to, as we keep practicing, to shut down those after action reports we run in our head. Could I have done this on the call? Would I have been more helpful? Could I have saved this one? And all that stuff. And the mindfulness practice as part of that, as part of being where you are now, that includes meditation. And then the next thing, which is breathing, which we'll get into here in a second, is critically important. We have to be able to get back to embracing the quiet and the normal when we're so used to going and responding to alarms and calls and emergent things. So the last kind of big section is breath or breathing. And Kim says, the breath is the body's natural stress reliever. And if you've ever, which a lot of people have, taken that kind of deep breath where it relaxes you, that's what she means, right? It works. Often, there's so many different breathing methods. There's like the box breathing method where you breathe in for 4, hold it for 4, breathe out for 4, hold it for 4, and you do that over and over. It's actually a great relaxation thing before bed. There's like 4, 7, 6, 8 or something like that, different sequences, or just take 5, slow, 5 seconds in your nose, 5 seconds out your mouth, all these different things. Kim has great walkthroughs in there. There's a lot of other resources. Like I mentioned, I use Headspace, but the tools in Mindfulness for Warriors is great. And Kim encourages folks she works with to breathe or take a breathing break at least once during the day. I mentioned in the morning I do that, at least 5 calming breaths. Sometimes I won't because, say I did the assault bike, I'm breathing hard anyway, so I'm kind of taking those deep breaths. But it's good maybe later in the day to just sit there in quiet. You don't need songs, you don't need sounds, and to just get those breaths in, those deep breath in, hold it a little bit, deep breath out. You can really feel it when you start to do it. If you have anxiety, if you have panic, if you can feel a big difference. And sometimes it's hard, right? Because you feel like I can't get my breath. But the more you practice this meditation, mindfulness, and breath, it really is helpful. Like I said, check out the Mindfulness for Warriors book by Kim Colegrove. Check out the Pause First Foundation. Pay attention to those signs and symptoms I mentioned. And even if folks don't have a lot of them or they don't have suicidal ideation or anything, being a first responder, being the spouse of a first responder is very hard. And it's not just hard while they're doing it. It's hard maybe when they're off on vacation and not able to enjoy their vacation because they're still ramped up, or certainly in retirement when they get out of that environment, but have been in it for so long or it sticks with you. And so I want to close with sharing another great sentiment from Kim, and by thanking you all again for coming back to the show, for sharing it. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Really want to share these resources and the knowledge of folks that have been on the show, that will be on the show, and got some cool people lined up in the future. And really appreciate you all going to peopleprocessprogress.com. Again, all my connections are there, emails, Instagram and stuff. I'm at PANNELLKG on Instagram and Twitter. There's People Process Progress on Facebook and peopleprocessprogress@gmail.com. If you go to the website, you want to be on the show, or you know someone that should be on the show, a person that has some process to share with us so we can all make progress, that'd be great. Send them to peopleprocessprogress.com. And I'll close with a reading from the book and the way that Kim closes her book, Mindfulness for Warriors, Empowering First Responders to Reduce Stress and Build Resilience. Quote, "You now know everything you need to know to begin meditating. I encourage you to seek out more information, do some research, get an app on your phone, or take a local class. But honestly, the best way to learn more about meditation is to do it. You can read every book ever written, listen to podcasts, and scan the internet for information. but you won't discover nearly as much about meditation as you will by meditating. Good luck, and let me know if I can help." End quote. Stay safe. Wash those hands, everybody, and I wish you Godspeed.